All right, so today we're diving into some pretty intense international intrigue.
Sounds exciting.
It is, it is. We're talking U.S.-Pakistan relations,
Yeah.
and our main source is a classified Pakistani government document.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's causing quite a stir. It reads like a political thriller. Secret meetings, diplomatic cables, allegations of the U.S. pushing for regime change.
Really?
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
So what's the document all about?
Well, it's a cable that was obtained by The Intercept,
Okay.
and it details this meeting between U.S. State Department officials and Assad Majid Khan, the Pakistani ambassador to the U.S.
I see.
And the timing of this meeting is really key. It happened on March 7, 2022,
Okay.
just 2 weeks after Russia invaded Ukraine.
Right around the time when everyone's trying to figure out where they stood on the whole thing?
Exactly. And this is where it gets even more interesting.
Right.
Right before this meeting, Pakistan's Prime Minister at the time, Imran Khan, visited Moscow.
Oh, wow. So he met with Putin.
Yeah, he did. And that move did not go over well in Washington.
I can imagine. The U.S. was pushing for global condemnation of the invasion, and Pakistan, under Khan, decided to stay neutral.
Right, and Khan meeting with Putin on the very day the invasion started, it really made the U.S. uneasy.
Yeah, that definitely would have raised some eyebrows in Washington.
For sure. Okay. So back to this meeting. According to the document, Assistant Secretary of State Donald Lu expressed concern to the Pakistani ambassador.
What kind of concern?
Well, The Intercept quotes Lu as saying, people here and in Europe are quite concerned about why Pakistan is taking such an aggressively neutral position.
On Ukraine, he means.
Yes, on Ukraine. And he even suggests that maybe Khan is the one calling the shots and that others in Pakistan might be more receptive to the U.S. perspective.
Interesting. So it sounds like the U.S. was trying to gauge whether there was any flexibility in Pakistan's position.
Exactly. And then comes the bombshell. The document claims that Lu brought up the possibility of a no-confidence vote against Khan.
Oh, wow.
And he allegedly said if the no-confidence vote against the prime minister succeeds, all will be forgiven in Washington.
Seriously? All will be forgiven?
That's what the document says. And he specifically links it to the Russia visit, saying it's being looked at as a decision by the prime minister.
So it's like a quid pro quo. Remove Khan and we're back to business as usual.
Yeah, it really does sound that way. And this is especially significant because the U.S. officially denied any involvement in Khan's removal.
I see. So this quote directly contradicts their official narrative.
Exactly. It suggests a level of interference that many find pretty troubling.
So how did the Pakistani ambassador react to all of this?
Well, the document reveals his frustration.
What did he say?
He basically pointed out the hypocrisy of it all. How the U.S. expected Pakistan's support on all their issues, but didn't reciprocate.
Ah, that feeling of being taken for granted.
Exactly, like that friend who only calls when they need something.
Right, not exactly a recipe for a healthy relationship.
No, not at all. And this feeling of imbalance is really important context for understanding everything that happens next.
So what happened after this meeting? Did it stay a secret?
Not for long. Khan went public, referencing the cable, even waving it at a rally.
Bold move.
It was.
Huh.
And that really set things in motion.
What do you mean?
Well, a month later, Khan was removed from power in a no-confidence vote.
Wait, so he actually lost power?
He did.
So what happened to Khan after he was removed?
Well, things went downhill pretty quickly for him. He faced an attempted assassination, was imprisoned on corruption charges, and now he's blocked from running in the upcoming elections.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a rough few years for him. And to make matters worse, he's also been prosecuted for allegedly violating state secrets laws by discussing the cable.
Oh, wow. So they're really coming after him.
It seems that way.
So this one meeting, this one cable, it seems like it had a massive ripple effect.
It's like a domino effect.
Yeah.
Starting with that meeting and leading to all this turmoil in Pakistan.
It makes you wonder if it was all orchestrated.
Right. Did the U.S. directly cause Khan's downfall, or did they just create the conditions that made it more likely?
That's the question everyone is trying to figure out. And to really understand the answer, we need to talk more about the role of the Pakistani military.
The deep state, as they call it.
Exactly, the deep state. They're a force to be reckoned with in Pakistani politics. And their involvement in this whole saga is, well, let's just say it's complicated.
All right, well, let's unpack that in part 2 of our deep dive. Okay, so the deep state. Where do they fit into all of this?
Well, to really understand the significance of this whole thing, we got to kind of step into the shoes of those Pakistani officials.
Yeah, makes sense.
I mean, think about it. This document, it was a cable sent from their ambassador in the U.S. back to Pakistan, right?
Right, like their own internal communication.
Exactly. It gives us a window into their thinking, their raw reactions to this U.S. pressure.
Unfiltered.
Yeah, and that assessment section, that's really key. They're not just like annoyed, they're seriously alarmed.
I could see that.
They see Liu's comments as a direct threat, a blatant attempt to influence their politics.
It's got to feel like a violation, like someone coming into your house and telling you how to run things.
Exactly, that's the feeling. They felt like their sovereignty was undermined. They even recommended issuing a formal diplomatic protest.
Which they actually did, right? Khan's government later issued that protest.
But they did. They weren't going to stay silent. They pushed back.
But this cable, it seems like it had such a huge ripple effect. It's almost symbolic of a much bigger problem.
It's like it exposed the cracks in the foundation, right? Those long simmering tensions between the U.S. and Pakistan. And this wasn't just some isolated incident,
So there's a pattern here.
The U.S. has a history of meddling in Pakistani politics, oftentimes favoring the military over democratic institutions.
So going back to the military, this deep state concept, can you break that down a bit more for us?
Well, imagine a shadow government operating behind the scenes, right? Pulling the strings, wielding immense power, even when there's a civilian government in place.
It's a little unsettling.
Yeah, it is. That's the Pakistani military. They're not just the army. They're a political force.
Wow. So how do they fit into Khan's story then? Both his rise and his fall.
Yeah, well, initially, it's likely they saw Khan as, well, kind of like a useful pawn, a popular figurehead who could give their rule a bit of legitimacy.
They prop them up.
That's the theory. But Khan, as we were talking about before, he started to assert himself more.
Oh, so he started stepping on some toes.
You could say that. He challenged the military's authority, wanted more control over foreign policy. He was stepping out of line.
Yeah, that usually doesn't end well when you're dealing with a powerful military.
Nope. And his popularity started to fade, right? Coupled with his stance on the Ukraine war, which, really clashed with U.S. interests, well, it might have been the perfect moment for the military to make their move.
So they saw him as a liability.
Potentially.
Yeah.
And the U.S. pressure, intentional or not, could have been the nudge they needed,
Wow, so they capitalized on Khan's vulnerability, used the U.S. pressure, and orchestrated his removal. That's pretty dark.
Yeah, it is. It raises some serious concerns about the U.S.'s role in all of this. Did they really understand the consequences of their actions? Did they underestimate the military's power?
And what about the impact on everyday Pakistanis? This can't just be happening in a vacuum.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The human cost of all of this political turmoil is immense. The economic crisis, fueled in part by those global factors, but made worse by the instability, it's led to just skyrocketing inflation.
So people are hurting.
They are. People are struggling just to afford basic necessities. And then you've got the crackdown on dissent, which has created this atmosphere of fear. People are afraid to speak out. Journalists are being silenced. Political opposition is suppressed.
It sounds like a nightmare scenario for anyone who values democracy.
It is. It's a chilling reminder that, these foreign policy decisions have very real-world consequences.
Yeah, the ripple effect.
Exactly. Behind the politics are real people whose lives are being upended. And in this case, the consequences are pretty devastating.
It makes you wonder if the U.S., in trying to achieve their strategic goals, sometimes loses sight of the human element.
That's a valid concern. It raises those important ethical questions about intervention. When does trying to influence a situation turn into meddling? And when do those potential benefits of intervention outweigh the risk of, destabilizing a country?
It's about balancing act.
It is. And it's one that isn't easy to get right. But I think the key takeaway here is that Pakistan and its people shouldn't be seen as pawns in some bigger game.
They have to have a say in their own future.
Exactly. They deserve the right to determine their own future, free from that external interference, even if it's, well-intentioned.
So where do we go from here? How do we even begin to untangle all of this and understand those long-term consequences?
Well, that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We'll look at the broader implications for the U.S.-Pakistan relationship, what it means for the future of Pakistani democracy, and those crucial lessons to be learned from this whole episode.
So we've really unpacked a lot about this Pakistani document and everything that happened afterward. But, I keep thinking about this whole question of U.S. involvement in regime change.
It's a big one.
It is. It's a topic with, a long and messy history.
Yeah.
And this situation with Pakistan, it really brings it all into focus.
Yeah, it's like opening Pandora's box, you know? You start asking these questions about power, national sovereignty, the consequences of intervention.
The ethics of it all.
It's a minefield for sure, a moral and ethical minefield.
And even if we take the U.S. at their word and say, okay, they didn't directly orchestrate Khan's removal, it's still pretty clear their actions had a major impact.
Right.
It's that gray area that's so hard to define.
Oh.
Where does diplomacy end and meddling begin?
Yeah.
And who gets to decide what's in the best interest of another country?
Those are the tough questions. And there are rarely any easy answers.
Yeah.
But one thing that really strikes me is that even when actions are taken with, the best of intentions,
Right.
they can still have these unintended consequences.
And those unintended consequences are often negative.
Exactly. It's like that saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah.
We can debate the U.S.'s motives all day long, but at the end of the day, we have to judge their actions based on the outcomes.
Based on the results.
Right. And in this case, the result has been a major setback for democracy in Pakistan.
Not to mention the human cost. The journalists and activists who were targeted, just for doing their jobs or expressing your views.
Absolutely. You can't ignore those human consequences. It highlights the real impact of these geopolitical moves.
Real people's lives are affected.
Yeah,
Yeah.
behind the political chessboard, there are real people whose lives are being turned upside down.
So given all of this, where do we go from here? What lessons can we learn from this situation? And how can we, apply them to future situations around the world?
Well, I think it starts with acknowledging just how complex these situations are, recognizing that there's always the potential for these unintended consequences.
So being more cautious.
Yeah, being more thoughtful, really taking the time to consider the long-term impact of our actions.
Taking a step back and asking, are we really helping or are we actually making things worse?
Exactly. And I think we also need to be more honest about the goals of U.S. foreign policy.
What do you mean?
Well, is promoting democracy and human rights really a priority? Or are those values taking a back seat to strategic interests?
So maybe we need to question the very idea that the U.S. has the right to intervene in other countries' affairs in the first place.
That might be a radical idea to some, but I think it's a conversation worth having. Maybe a more humble approach, one that prioritizes diplomacy and working together with other countries.
A more collaborative approach.
Yeah, maybe that would be more effective in achieving lasting peace and stability.
It's a conversation we need to have, and not just about Pakistan.
Right. This applies to everything happening on the global stage.
It's a messy world out there.
It is. It's complicated. But it's the world we all live in. And the more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to face those challenges.
To make sense of it all.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I hope we've given you some things to think about, some new perspectives, maybe even a little healthy skepticism about, how things work in the world.
It's all about asking those tough questions.
It is. Stay curious, stay engaged. The world needs more people like you, willing to dive deep and grapple with these complex issues.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.